Distinguished co-chairs and colleagues, my delegation wishes to align ourselves with the remarks delivered by St. Vincent and Grenadines on behalf of L69 and Brazil on behalf of G4 earlier today. We acknowledge the receipt of the Ref 3 by IGN co-chairs on UNSC reforms and appreciate their work in the process. In our national capacity, we wish to make the following points on this critical issue. The Summit of the Future at leadership level in September will determine the relevance of the organization itself for the 21st century. Moreover, the summit is meant to produce an action-oriented pact for the future, which will be endorsed by heads of state and government at the summit, aiming to forge a new global consensus on what our future should look like and what we can do together to secure it. As things stand, the lack of ambition in the third revised draft on this critical subject continues to be a major source of disappointment for my delegation. If the state of affairs persists, low ambition will translate into a low-hanging fruit which does not capture the vision of a reformed UNSC as envisioned by a majority of UN member states who continue to seek expansion in both permanent and non-permanent categories of membership of the UNSC and the beginning of text-based negotiations within a fixed time frame. Furthermore, my delegation has the following specific points to make on the draft input itself. First and foremost, on the process itself. A Pact for the Future is an intergovernmentally negotiated outcome document. Resolution 62/557 on Security Council reforms also calls for intergovernmental negotiations. Hence, any language that the IGN provides to the SOTF should be an outcome of text-based negotiations. It will be important to accept this as a basic premise and principle of our work. Thus far, all three drafts that have been crafted by the co-chairs are their work itself. We urge the IGN to carry out text-based negotiations to show the linkage between what member states have asked for, which would correctly be reflected only through a process of text-based negotiations. Otherwise, the text may be provided to the Summit of the Future in the personal capacity of the co-chairs. Second, it is critical that the language relating to the Security Council reforms in the SOTF is concise, sharp, leader-like, and ambitious, which can be agreed and signed off by our leadership at the summit. The draft IGN input so far is not leader-like. Third, the format followed by the IGN does not adhere to the template followed with regard to the language suggestions made for other sections and chapters of the Pact of the Future that actually lists actions. The IGN input as it stands hardly gives any action-oriented language. Fourth, the lack of ambition in an expansive, long-running draft combined with lack of timelines on when the negotiations will begin could even be construed as this year's rollover decision by the PGA. My delegation wishes to reiterate that these two are two different matters and should not be linked. Fifth, my delegation would also like to raise our reservation on picking and choosing from the convergences section of the elements paper. As often suggested by the co-chairs themselves, the elements paper is an informal document which acts as their own summary interpretation of the discussions. Picking from certain sections of it while ignoring the others is not appropriate with regard to the transparency that we need in a process like this. In addition, as seen in Ref 3, there have been additions on the substantial front on the issue of regional representation. This has also been noticed in the latest elements paper that was circulated. Processes need to be respected, and we urge the co-chairs to please ensure that substantial entries are not made without consultation with member states, especially in the final cuts. Hence, we urge that such references may be dropped from Rev 3 and the draft elements paper. Sixth, as repeatedly requested by several reform-minded delegations, including member states from the Global South, Inputs with attributions from the 2015 framework document must be included in Ref 3 as they form the submission of member states themselves. The section under Action 1, in particular, therefore, cannot continue to be only from the convergences section of the elements paper. Seventh, the actions suggested fall short of actually spelling out the action that needs to be taken to accelerate the progress on UNSC reforms. The deletion of SDG 16.8 is deeply unfortunate, and we call for reference to SDG 16.8 to be re-added and expanded in full as broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. This is indeed a clarion call to adjudge the UN true to the contemporary realities of today, rendering voice and visibility to the global South. This cannot be ignored. Eighth, on the issue of providing support and resources to the IGN as a process, we cannot agree to our leaders deliberating on these matters which have not even been fully discussed within the IGN process itself. Ninth, there is only a half-hearted, cursory reference to Africa. The advice falls short of including the common African position. Not including African demands is undermining the future itself. We need more than just paying lip service to Africa when the 54-member-strong Africa group has clearly articulated its unified position on UNSC reforms. Finally, apart from Ref 3, we wish to reiterate our concerns regarding the revised version of the element paper itself. Substantial changes were made in the convergences section of the second draft issued last month, which did not accurately reflect the IGN discussions this year. The same trend is visible in Ref 3, where substantial changes on regional representation have been made. My delegation urges that substantive additions and edits in the revised version of elements paper and in Ref 3 of the draft advice may be dropped and taken up in the next IGN cycle for debate and discussions. This is an important prerequisite for a smooth rollover at the end of this year's cycle and to preserve and safeguard the credibility of the process itself, even while ensuring full accountability and transparency of proceedings for the benefit of member states. As an intent of our constructive engagement, we renew our call for the following: an urgent reform of the UNSC, ensuring that the Security Council in all facets represents 21st century realities and responds effectively to global challenges. Such a reform can only be achieved by ensuring adequate representation of developing countries, especially of unrepresented and underrepresented regions and groups such as Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as Asia and the Pacific, in both categories of membership of the United Nations Security Council. The Summit of the Future will be judged on its delivery of reformed multilateralism. It cannot be a summit of the past, for that will, in our view, condemn the edifice of this great institution that has defined multilateralism and its path ahead to a perilous, vicious cycle of fading into irrelevance. We welcome the opportunity to further discuss the details, including language submissions for the SOTF draft with all of you in a frank and candid manner, and would welcome your thoughts and feedback in the coming days. Let us all not bind ourselves and rush forward with submitting inputs that fail to reflect the will of the majority of the UN member states. We still have time till September, and we must all utilize it in an optimal fashion. I thank you.